What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of Tailgate Talk. We took a week off for some health reasons, but we are back. And after a lackluster Week 4 game from the Orange and the Blue, the Colorado hype train spectacularly crashing on national television, Alabama reasserting itself against the Fighting Land Sharks of Ole Miss, an instant classic from South Bend, and the Pac-12, aside from Colorado, having yet another banner week in their song season, there's a lot to talk about. One of my best and most ridiculous friends, Chris Marler from Saturday Down South, is graciously taking some time out of his Taylor Swift adoration schedules to join us today. So, Chris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. You nailed that. That's all very accurate and spot on. This has been like the best week.
I mean, I know you're a Swiftie, just listening to that music, crying at night. You know,
I don't cry at night anymore. I'm good now.
Hey, that's a positive, man. You know, I'm really happy for that journey, and I hope it wasn't a cruel summer for you.
Oh, there it is. That's good. No, we're not out of the woods yet, but I thought like that whole thing with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, like I admittedly caught up in it immediately. I thought it was awesome. It was so much fun.
It's a cult. These Swifties are cult-like. You know, they're gonna be marching down the street for me, just calling them Swifties and a cult, I bet. But you know, here we are. So let's get right to it. The Gators play Kentucky this weekend. So what are your initial thoughts on that matchup?
So Kentucky hasn't played anybody. It's been tough for the fact that like it's tough to gauge this team because Devin Leary's a guy that when he's in NC State, his freshman year, he was like a 35 touchdown to 7 interception guy. Like, and that's exceptional. And at any Power 5 conference, especially as a freshman, that hasn't really translated to the SEC. I thought that was a guy like going into the season, I had him, I think, as like my third best QB in the SEC because I thought he would be a marked improvement, and he probably still is from Will Levis, but 9 touchdowns and 5 turnovers in 4 games against the 130th ranked strength of schedule is not good. And I think that going into the game against Florida, you're talking about a defense that's been very, very good. We saw what they did against Tennessee. Really, that game against Utah was close. Florida's offense just didn't do anything. I mean, their defense
kept them in that game.
Exactly, and that game was closer in the first half than people remember. The offense just couldn't do anything, and then they had that turnover in the beginning of the second half where they're inside the 15-yard line. And things just kind of get away from them. I think Florida wins that game. And I did see a stat today that's kind of concerning that they haven't won an SEC road game since the COVID season. And
that is not true. They won at Texas A&M last year
against the SEC East. So I think that is
well played, sir. Well played.
It's going to be like it'll be a fun atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's a really good spot for Florida. You know, it's not at night. It's a little bit of like a sleepy kickoff, I think, more for Kentucky than Florida, because Florida really is the one that was something to prove here.
Yep. And, you know, this is the first time since 2003 that this is not a night game in Lexington. So It's been 20 years. And, you know, noon games favor the road team more than the home team because the road team has obviously been there the night before. They're settled. They're amped. Whereas, you know, you just got to get up and roll out of bed if you're the hosting team for the noon game. So what do you think is the number one key on both sides of the ball for Florida and Kentucky?
So I mean, protecting the football for one, and I think running the football effectively. And that's something like one thing that concerns me with Kentucky is that they have not put together a full game offensively, even with Liam Cohen coming back as the OC. It's either they've done really well in the passing game and the running game hasn't been there, or vice versa. But protecting the football, Graham Mertz, I don't think it's had a turnover since the Utah game. He's been one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the SEC. It's been really fun to watch. You can tell he's starting to really like gel and, you know, for lack of better words, kind of feel himself in that offense. And I think the run game, especially, like you have to figure out a way to establish a run for either team to get the passing game going. And I think it's like, I don't think that we're going to see some huge offensive outbursts from either side. I think it's going to be a defensive football game, like maybe a little bit more low scoring. But I like Florida. I do. I like Florida in the game. And I think that, like, you know, Kentucky is a team that's 4-0 and ranked, but they haven't played anybody. And if you're
Kentucky
Florida,
ranked?
Yeah, I believe maybe they're not. I mean, if they aren't, they probably shouldn't be because they're 4-0, but they've played the 130th ranked schedule, like I said earlier. If you're Florida,
they are not ranked, but they did receive votes.
Okay. So if you're Florida, you've already gone on the road against Utah and kind of, you know, took some licks out there. But first game of the season, you know, and then now you talk about coming back against Tennessee and having a huge home game there. I think this is a really good spot for Florida. I think it's like, you know, like I'm a big stats guy, and historically Florida's just dominated this series, and it's always good when you have the ability to go into a game like this, the season after a loss, because you don't want to ever lose to Kentucky for Florida. You don't want to lose to Vanderbilt for Florida, but you're coming into a season where both those things happened. And so you're not in a spot where you're going to overlook that team where you might have in the past, because you can't, and you got a little bit of a revenge factor and a chip on your shoulder.
Well, this would be the first time if Florida does drop the game against Kentucky, it would be the first time that they've lost 3 in a row since Bear Bryant was the coach in Lexington.
Yeah.
So, that's it. It's one of those watershed moments of the season, and I think this is a really good measuring stick for Florida to see where they are, and for Kentucky for that matter. This is the first real opponent that they played this year, to my knowledge. So. That brings up a good question. Mark Stoops, I'm a Florida fan through and through, and I'm obviously wearing my orange today, but where does Mark Stoops fall in terms of coaching in the SEC? I think you can easily say he's the most successful coach since Bear Bryant at Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
So where does he fall in terms of current coaches in the SEC, if you were to rank them?
That's tough, because I always hate the question with Mark Stoops, because it's like, he gets like a built-in pass, and I don't really think that's like the best thing that we can there's few coaches, I feel like, in the SEC at least, where the goalposts move more than they do with Mark Stoops, because it's like, if you want to look at record and what he's done, then it's not that great. But
I would see you that and raise you Jimbo.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, like, it's one of those things where it's like, well, you've been at Kentucky for a while. You really dug it out of the mud, and like what it was before you got there. Jacob Phillips was pretty bad, but now you've been there for like 10 years, right? And so it's like, at some point, like, I think that Kentucky is a school that has like a built-in ceiling, a lot like the same, like along the lines of a team like South Carolina or Mississippi State, or I think it's only going to get worse, like we talked about before with the expansion and stuff like that of the SEC. But yeah, I think it's Kirby, Nick. I don't know about Kiffin. Kirby, Nick.
And then there's a wide gap. I would say there's a wide gap. Kirby and Nick are the top of the game.
Brian Kelly would be 3 for sure.
They looked terrible against Arkansas this weekend. That actually shocked me that it came down to LSU didn't look good to me against Arkansas.
Well, if we're talking about coaches in the SEC, I'm not going to base it off of the one game they had against Arkansas last week.
Yeah. Well, they got spanked by Florida State.
He's like coaches in college football active, I think, like over 270 wins total.
What's he done, though? What's Brian Kelly done? He wins, but he doesn't win where it counts. Think about every time Notre Dame went to the playoff.
They made the playoff, though, right?
They did, but they got spanked when they went there. So it's like, what do you really have to show for it, to say that you went?
I just don't like that. I hate that, because it's like we just refuse to give credit. Like, it's not easy to win at a lot of places. It's not easy to win a national title ever.
Well, Notre Dame, you want to talk about a built-in bias? Notre Dame will always have that.
Yeah, but at the time, it's like you can't like take away like that guy. That guy has 270 career wins. He's won at every level. He won in FCS. He won when he went to Cincy. He won at Notre Dame, and now he won in the SEC West in year 1, which I don't think anybody thought he was going to do at LSU.
Stop ever. Good point. Mm-hmm. So that brings a good question. So we're looking at Mark Stoops. So who do you think has a year? We're not at the halfway point, but we're getting there, right? We've seen enough. We're going into week 5. So who do you think, at least? I don't want to play the hot seat game. I don't like playing that game. So let's think about who has the most to prove for the rest of this year in the SEC, as far as either teams, coaches.
For teams, it's Tennessee. It's Tennessee and maybe Ole Miss, but it's Tennessee mainly, because they're the team that started out in the top 15. They're the team coming off the 11-win season where they beat Bama and they beat Florida, and I'm trying to think of what else. They just curb stomped Kentucky.
Then you lose to South Carolina in horrific fashion.
But they're going to beat South Carolina bad this weekend, so I'm not really worried about that. Yeah, for sure. But South Carolina's last in the SEC in yards per attempt from their secondary. They give up over 8.5 yards per attempt, which is awful. I think that Tennessee is the most improved because they're the ones that build up all the hype. Joe Milton, I could have told you, and I did say it over and over and over again. Like, there's no way that this Tennessee team just comes in and like doesn't miss a beat after you lost 2 NFL draft picks at receiver, a first-round draft pick at left tackle, and then a quarterback that's he's been better than Peyton was from a statistical standpoint. And so I don't think you're going to just automatically replace that. I think it's them for sure. From a coaching standpoint, it's Lane Kiffin, and I don't think he needs to prove anything in terms of he just signed an extension last year, so he's not going anywhere. At the same time, like, that's a bad look last week against Alabama. It's a really bad look that he had because
it was a winnable game. I mean, no, I know you're a Bama guy, but that was a winnable game for Ole Miss
for sure. And he spent the entire week talking trash and Twitter trolling and the castle's crumbling thing and all that kind of stuff from like on Twitter, the Taylor Swift thing, and then the Saturday morning he's posting he's going to Pilates and stuff like that. And like that's all fine if you win, but you didn't win and you got embarrassed and you took a team that had there was averaging 53.3 points per game going into that game, over 526 yards per game in total offense, and you were held to 10 points. You scored on your second drive and you didn't do anything else the rest of the game. And I thought it was a really bad look because of all the stuff that he chose to do going into that game. And if he's got another one at home against LSU. And what's scary is if you look at his record with Lane Kiffin is 5-4. 5-5 in his tenure at Ole Miss in games coming off a regular season loss.
That's not a good stat, Jim.
The 5 losses were by over 10.5 points per game. And equally unimpressive is the fact that the 5 wins, 1 came against Vandy, 1 came against Liberty, 2 were by 1 point apiece, and 1 was by 3 points against 5-7 A&M last year. So how does he respond? Because I don't think it's going to be great.
I tend to agree. So looking out away from the SEC, there are 2 teams that I think we're collectively looking at wondering what's next for them, and that's Colorado and Notre Dame. So what are your thoughts on where they go from here? Notre Dame, obviously, their 11 men on the field mistake probably cost them the game against Ohio State. And Colorado just ran into a buzzsaw at Oregon. So what do you think? What do you think's next for them?
I mean, so Colorado's in a unique situation that people don't really get because, one, we've never seen this before in college football. We've never seen this before. Like, you're talking about a complete roster overhaul where you only have like 11 dudes from last year's team that are still on this team. Like, it is a roster overhaul that we have absolutely never seen before. I mean, this is like stuff like out of a movie. It's just a crazy amount of new faces, and he's done a really good job. I mean, like, people forget at the start of the year, Colorado's win total was 3.5,
and they only won 1 last year.
Yeah, and they lost in their last 6 games. In their last 6 games last year, they had, I think their defense gave up an average of like 53 points per game or 51 points per game in the 6 games to close out the year. I mean, they were really, really bad. And so he doesn't have the dudes there. The reason why they're in a unique spot is because they have one of the best players in the country on their team, and he's currently out. But he's the best player on that team on offense and defense. So it's like you're hamstrung. Like, I mean, this would be
like Shedeur Sanders, though. I do like Shedeur Sanders as a quarterback, but he's not big. He's small and fast, and you can see what Dion was trying to do in building this roster. He wanted to be faster than everybody. But the problem is when you run into bigger teams like Oregon, sometimes brawn doesn't meet well.
Well, Oregon's a really good team. That's another thing too. Is that like people will get lost with some of the stuff that's happening in Colorado because they think that the Pac-12 is just like the Pac-12 and like the defenses are awful and they're not very good. Pac-12 is the best conference in football this year, and Oregon is a really, really good team that can contend for the playoff.
And how about Bo Nix, man?
Bo Nix is awesome.
Bo Nix has had a rebirth out there.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Usually, most dreams go to die in my experience with anything involving Oregon, but yeah, Bo Nix has been great. No, I think the stuff that's going to happen this week with USC is I don't see anything like Dan Lanning last week, which I loved that whole thing. Like, I don't think he's going to have anything that's going to be like a vengeance.
They're doing it for clicks. We're doing it for wins.
Listen,
fantastic,
man. It's just like, so I don't think you're going to have anything like that where they're going to get like a point proven, like, and like put on their heads or anything like that. I think that, I mean, USC's defense sucks. USC, like, their defense sucked last year. It sucks this year. I
And
think that
Lincoln Riley is the coach that you can never count on in the games he needs to win.
yeah, yeah, and it's weird too because it's like we base it on college football and football in general now. It's always like, well, what's the most important position in sports? Is the quarterback on a football team, and he has had multiple Heisman winners go to the playoff and get slapped around. He's had multiple teams that have been like, one loss teams get into the playoff and then just get embarrassed. So I think that they are a good offensive team. I think they're the third best team in the Pac-12. They don't play a complete brand of football. They don't play.
You got Oregon as number 1. Who do you have as number 2?
No, I have Washington at 1 and Oregon number 2.
Oh, all right.
USC might not be better than Oregon State, man. They might not even be better. They legitimately could be the 5th best team in the Pac-12. It's just too early to tell. They've played a horrible strength of schedule. Washington last week scored a touchdown on offense, defense, and special teams. All 3 phases of the game. They did that all in the first quarter. Oregon has allowed 7 total sacks in their last 17 games, dating back to the start of last year. 7 total. Bama's almost done it in 1 game.
Don't forget about Washington State either.
Cam Ward's been awesome.
Yep. And they just beat Oregon State this weekend. So, Washington State's going to hang around. I am rooting for Oregon State and Washington State, and I realize you're not going to like the Oregon State reference, but I feel like they got screwed in this expansion thing, and they have something to prove. And as a pure fan of football, I have no allegiance to either one of those teams. The game of college football is changing. So, yeah, I hope that they prove a point this year, that they are angry and getting in there and proving a point.
So, and for the listeners that don't know what Casey's talking about, my ex-fiance was an Oregon State grad. So I used to pull it a lot. But I also will say this. I'm past that now, so it's whatever. But Oregon State, I picked them to win the Pac-12 just at the start of the year because I do think they're a really, really good team. And they got a little bit of an uphill battle now after losing to Washington State on the road. But I'll tell you what about Oregon State from like the standpoint of expansion that pisses me off for them is that's a football program that's on the rise. That is a legitimate top 20 to 25 team in the country right now and last year. And it's a basketball team that went to the Elite Eight in the last 3 years and a baseball program that is one of the best baseball programs in the country year after year. So that is a brand I feel like everything has come down to TV markets, right? It's not about let's go get a good athletic department. Let's go get a good like university with like great teams and they have good academics and whatever. They're not going to do that. Like that's because all they're trying to do is sell TV, whether it's like ad dollars or if they want to just have TV contracts or whatever. That's
Did you see what Tom Izzo said at Michigan State today? He came out and he said, this is lunacy. And he's right. I mean, you got to think about it. He's got to go all the way out to Rutgers, and now they're going to have to play Washington. I mean, if you're in Michigan, I mean, that's unfair to student athletes. It's unfair to fans. And it's just lining the pockets of people at the NCAA that don't need another penny in their pocket, in my opinion.
I said a couple years ago when the Big 12 expanded because they were kind of like, having to branch out because the Big 10 taking Nebraska and then the Colorado going to Pac-12 and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you had like this is a decade ago. Like you had West Virginia. Like my question was this: who's paying for West Virginia to go play a Wednesday night volleyball game in Fort Worth, Texas? Because that is a long day of travel for a conference game or match or whatever you want to call it, like that you're going to have to go to. Who's paying for that? And I thought it was bad then because that's a very long distance to go from West Virginia to Fort Worth. You're talking about Rutgers going to Seattle or like, going from like Happy Valley out to Pasadena on a weeknight. Like it's horrible for student athletes. It's horrible for and it's in just in the same way that they did the whole thing. We're going to shorten games. Why?
Well, and then you've got, the Atlantic Coast Conference. I know everybody calls it the ACC, but the Atlantic Coast Conference is now going to have Stanford in it? Like what?
That's so weird.
So it's that's an interesting point to make. So going back to the SEC, the last question I have for you before the buy-sell round, what's your biggest surprise so far in the SEC, whether it be good or bad, and outside the SEC that you've seen so far that you didn't see coming?
Outside the SEC, I'll start there. I think a lot of us slept on Sam Hartman in Notre Dame. I think a lot of us slept on that because, and if you think about it, it's kind of dumb. Like I just didn't hear any preseason Heisman talk with him, and he's done everything to be in that conversation, regardless of what happened last week.
That was not a loss in Sam Hartman. That was a loss on the Notre Dame coaching staff,
without a doubt. And so, that's a team that they're still going to play USC. They're still going to go on the road at Clemson, who will probably be ranked by the time they play them. They still have games like against other teams. Like
they got a game against Duke this weekend. Duke is ranked. Game day's going there. I mean,
I don't know if we're going to get to this, but I said it on my podcast too, and it'll sound crazy, but Duke would beat Alabama right now. They would.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
I mean, listen, Duke has played they played 3 of their 4 games against teams that made a bowl last year or Power 5 teams, right? They played Northwestern, they played who's a Power 5 team, obviously. UConn was a bowl team last year. People forget this. UConn was like what was propping up Michigan's strength of schedule last year for a while until they played at Penn State, or played Penn State at home. Like UConn won 6 games last year. They're not world beaters, but and then they played Clemson. And so I will tell you this. If you told me that if you just put like a dark spot over the 2 helmets and I said, hey, tell me where this team should be ranked. And I told you it was Michigan. Okay. If I told you it was Michigan and I said they beat Clemson 28-7, they beat Northwestern by, I think it was like 30, or like 21 or something like that, 35-14. Then they beat some FCS team, like a drum. And then they also beat UConn 41-7. If I told you that was Michigan, you would say, yeah, that's a top 5 team. They beat Clemson and they beat the brakes off a conference game. And then a Scooby-Doo pulled the hat, the thing off the top of the hat and said, oh, never mind, it's Duke. If they had a different logo on the side of that helmet, they would be in the top 10 or top 5.
And Michigan has not impressed me at all. I mean, you want to talk about they played East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. I mean, they haven't even played. Michigan does not play a ranked team until November 11th when they go to Penn State.
Yeah.
And they play Ohio State. They have played 2 ranked teams all year.
They did the same thing last year for the entire season. They only had 2 teams they played last year before the playoff that were ranked. I mean, that's before the playoff, not even their conference championship game. And another fun fact about Michigan, they go on the road this week to play. I looked this up today. It's one of my favorite stats. They go on the road this weekend to play Nebraska. All right. Nebraska's 2-2. They were 4-8 last year. Michigan goes on the road to play Nebraska. It is the first time they will leave the state of Michigan for a game in the month of September since 2019.
That's ridiculous.
They've played 14 teams. Well, you're not allowed to talk about that because you're a Florida fan.
Hey! We've got great schedules coming out, and we went to Utah.
They haven't left the state since 2019, and the other thing is they've played 14 games in the month of September, right? Since 2019. Only 3 of those teams have had winning records. Only 3: Western Michigan, Northern Illinois, and Iowa.
Punters are people too.
Mm-hmm.
Iowa, punting, where we turn it into a whole separate thing in Iowa.
Yeah.
But man, they got the brake speed off of them. Real quick, Penn State, real or not for real?
Real. Very real.
I would like to see that happen. I mean, they look good on Saturday night. Penn State, if you take away, comparing Michigan and what the schedule that they're playing. I mean, you look at Penn State, they have to play at Ohio State, and then they play Michigan at home. That schedule is not the easiest for them to get there. They have to play at Maryland. They have to play Michigan State. I mean, Penn State could be your Big Ten champion this year, because I was not impressed with Ohio State. I mean, yes, that was a gutsy win. I'm not impressed with Ohio State.
I'm more impressed with Ohio State than I am Michigan, but I'm more impressed with Penn State than all of them, because Penn State might have the best quarterback in the Big Ten with Drew Allar. Yep. They've got maybe the best running back tandem in the country with who they have in the backfield there. They can rotate 2 and 3 deep on the defensive line, just like an SEC school. Like their
special teams, I mean, are lights out this year.
Yeah, they're very deep. They're very deep on the defensive line. And I'll tell you the other thing too is this: they won that game against Iowa 31-0, right? And now listen, we can make fun of Iowa's offense all we want, but this is a real stat, and it's a conference
Iowa has
game.
An offense.
Yeah, Iowa had 76 total yards of offense against Penn State. They had 54 of it on the first 2 drives. They had 8 of their 10, I think, total possessions were 3-and-outs. Like I mean, like Penn, but and listen, that's they put up 41 the week before. Like Iowa's offense has been better. They got embarrassed against Penn State.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And I, as an SEC fan, I like seeing James Franklin getting
Yeah,
his due. What he did at Vanderbilt, I think people either have forgotten about or not given enough credit to.
yeah,
But I love to see him be successful. So, I'm rooting for Penn State this year.
yeah.
So buy, sell. This is going to be a segment where I just give you a name and you say buy or sell, and you can
Okay.
either choose to elaborate on that or not. Totally up to you. Buy, sell, Florida State.
Bye.
Georgia Bulldogs. Buy or sell.
I'll buy because the schedule's easy.
Do you think Georgia loses a game this year?
I do. I was gonna say this is my biggest surprise, and it shouldn't be, but in the SEC, the biggest surprise for me with them is that how slow they've started. And I get that, like, I mean, listen, that's the 110th ranked strength of schedule they've played. They played UAB, UT Martin, Ball State, and South Carolina. They were losing at halftime in South Carolina. You have to give them credit because they were able to win. But that schedule is so easy. I'd be shocked at, like, if they get challenged till late October or November when they play y'all, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. But that, I mean, it is like they're not, like, they're injured and beat up. They're just not the team that I thought they would be. And maybe they'll get better along the way, but they didn't start like this the last 2 seasons.
And Carson Beck just has not come out. You look at recent Georgia quarterbacks like Jake Fromm or Stetson Bennett, who was there for 438 years.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys had command of that offense. And those guys knew where to put the ball. They knew how to manage the game. Carson Beck just looks lost out there.
Yeah.
More often than not.
I don't know about that. I think he's been pretty good.
Yeah, I think he's been pretty good, but he's not good by recent Georgia quarterback standards.
Just Stetson.
So buy, sell, Miami.
I don't know enough about Miami, to be honest, to say anything. I'll say sell just because they still got to play Florida State, and I think they've got a couple other games in the ACC that could be tough. So I would say so, but I think it's a better team than people thought, for sure. And Van Dyke has been awesome.
Buy, sell, Clemson.
I'll buy for the rest of the schedule because it's the ACC, but like they should have beat Florida State, but they got.
I was very angry, and Dabo, if you're listening to this, I'm very angry with you, sir.
I mean, yeah,
you had them the whole game.
Of his own actions are just catching up with him. I'll say bye, but I mean, I think they're a 9-win team, which isn't bad, but it's like, I mean, whatever.
And the last buy, sell, the SEC has a national champion this year.
Sell.
Yep, same here. And just for the listeners, easy questions to end this episode 2 of Tailgate Talk. What's your favorite SEC stadium aside from Alabama? You can't pick that.
Bryant-Denny wouldn't be it anyway. My favorite stadium. I love going to Athens as a city. It's my favorite. Death Valley, probably. Death Valley is a lot of fun. I've always had a good time there. I've never seen a Bama game there, so that's probably why. And I'll tell you what, I got to experience Auburn from the field, so it's a little bit different. But that was an incredible atmosphere. It's probably the best atmosphere I've ever been in.
That's awesome. Arkansas was my favorite. We went out there in 2016, and the fans were great. The stadium was great. Even though we lost, the fans were just absolutely, thank you for coming. Do you need help back to your hotel? Do you need ideas with things?
Yeah.
I was really impressed. What's your favorite SEC tradition?
Favorite SEC tradition? Winning. That's tough. Favorite SEC tradition?
You know what? I'll even give you a favorite Bama tradition and a favorite SEC tradition. And I'll tell you my favorite Florida tradition is I went back down at the end of the quarter. I think that's fantastic. And the world got to see it at night with the new lights in the stadium. But I love, and I realize I probably shouldn't be saying this on the week that we play them, I love it when Kentucky does the call to the post before the game. So I think that's really, really cool. Even though it's horse racing, it represents that state. So I don't know if that helps you with your answer at all.
My favorite tradition. I mean, again, it's kind of tough just because I'm like off the top of my head, there's so many. I think that, oh man, this is a tough question. Like
And here I thought I was letting you off easy at the end.
playing Thunder Circle, I like that. I love when LSU plays neck. I think that's really cool. Um,
South Carolina with Sandstorm.
yeah, Sandstorm's fun. It just they play it too much.
If I have to hear that damn bird crowing in the background or that
Yeah,
rooster or whatever that is on third down, I swear I hear that in my nightmares.
I don't know. That's a really tough question. I think there's like there's so many. Athens when they do the thing with Bob O'Reilly and Larry Munson's voice coming over the stage. I think that's awesome. I mean, the other stuff is too. It's like I think that like for me when I say traditions, like in the SEC, I just love stuff like the stories you hear and stuff that like makes it so like Georgia's playing Auburn this weekend, and that's not like it hasn't from a results base. It hasn't been a rivalry in a while because Georgia's won 15 out of the last 18. But like one of my favorite things about that it's my favorite game in the entire conference every single year because it's like there's so much history there. They've been playing since 1892. They played in Piedmont Park for the first time. I think there's a lot of cool, rich history with stuff like that.
And you look at it, Georgia leads 63-56. So, I mean, it's a close rivalry. I mean, it's always, and that rivalry is generally crazy. So I'm with you. I love that. And that's another casualty of conference. I'm assuming that will be kept, but you look at a lot of these games like Alabama, Ole Miss probably will be going the way of the dodo bird, but Florida, Kentucky, I think that rivalry is finally getting good, but we don't play Kentucky next year. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to see where that goes. But last question, favorite uniform in the SEC and your least favorite uniform in the SEC?
I think LSU is the most overrated, to
Agreed.
be honest. I don't really get it. I love when they do the white pants, purple jerseys, and white helmets. I think those are very underrated. Best uniforms, those Ole Miss sky or what do you call it?
Or the powder blue ones.
Cool. I like those. Auburn's all whites are awesome. I love those. Kentucky's got some very underrated ones as well,
especially when they have the chrome helmets. I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And Carolina's got a couple that are fun.
I think Tennessee's going dark mode this weekend.
Yeah, that's kind of overrated for me.
I feel like Tennessee. I like their smoky grays. I don't like the black.
I hate the smoky grays. All right, so my favorite. I mean, the purple and white combination, which we rarely see from LSU, is one of my favorites. But I think that the best ones, in my opinion, the all white stormtroopers from Auburn are really, really good. And I will say the Ole Miss powder blues.
All right. And what's your final score prediction for Florida, Kentucky? And does Florida, or is the spread covered, or does Florida upset?
Florida 2017.
All right, I'll take that. All right, everybody. Well, go and have a good week. Go Gators, and thank you, Chris, for your time. We appreciate it, and hope. Who does Bama play this weekend?
Mississippi State.
All right,
I'm leaving. I gotta go.
Silence those cowbells.
See you, bud.
Bye.